Frere Jean was the first to wake. Smelling the smoke, the aged monk sat upright in bed, his hand instinctively clasping the iron key and the gold medallion on a chain around his neck. He threw on his robe and deftly moved toward a thick hemp rope hanging from the tower. After hauling on it once, twice, the heavy bronze bell began to toll. 3 other monks burst into the chamber, eyes wide, with rough wool blankets draped across their shoulders. Without a word, all 4 hurried to a stone and wood chamber, already half engulfed in flames. At the room's center, still untouched by the blaze, stood an ornate silver chest on a low stone pedestal. Using their blankets, the other monks beat back the flames enough that Frere Jean could insert the key and open the chest. He lifted out the contents, an old stained bolt of linen already singed from the heat. Tucking it beneath his robe, he hobbled out of the burning room toward the monastery's rear entrance where the horses were stabled. From the village came the thunder of hoofbeats and cries of alarm. As the other 3 monks stood around him, illuminated in the moonlight, Jean removed the gold medallion from around his neck. It bore the embossed image of a many-limbed oak tree. He looked into each man's eyes. Then, approaching the youngest, he placed the medallion's chain over his head and took the bolt of cloth from beneath his robe and tucked it into a leather pouch with a shoulder strap. All eyes were on the strong young monk as he slung the pouch over his shoulder and covered it with his tunic. "You are being entrusted with what will one day be recognized as the church's most valuable material possession," the old man rasped, laboring to catch his breath. "It is the most sacred earthly connection to the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Deliver it to the Abbot of Chambéry. The gold oak will confirm your mission. God be with you. Now, go." The young monk jumped onto the back of a waiting horse and galloped into the night, just as the invading horde rounded the corner leading to the front of the monastery. The horsemen swarmed inside, throwing silver goblets, figurines, and other artifacts onto the blankets and howling into the darkness. As the 3 remaining monks tried to save the monastery, a phalanx of horsemen struck them down with mace and sword. Frere Jean was felled by a single blow from a chain-mailed fist. The camera pulled back to reveal a scene of flaming destruction. Suddenly, the image froze, a ghostly abbey engulfed in flames. Looking exhausted, Dr. Robert Strickland stopped the DVD player, rubbed his eyes, and glanced at the clock on a nearby desk. It was 1:42 a.m. Strickland gathered up the stack of papers strewn across the couch beside him. The top page was printed on fine parchment with the gold-crossed keys of St. Peter, the symbol of the papacy. Yellow markings highlighted several paragraphs pertaining to ethnogenomic sequencing and a proposed time frame for delivery of the sample. After slipping the pages into an unmarked manila folder and locking it in a filing cabinet, Strickland pressed the DVD's eject button and returned the disc to its case. Dropping it into the desk drawer, he turned out the light and headed upstairs to bed.
So in the course of his investigation, Strickland travels to the Middle East and genetically samples a Bedouin tribe from the Negev desert region of Israel. That evening, they wended their way along one of the passages in the encampment to the large tent in the center. Their guide, Habib, led the way with a kerosene lantern that threw flickering shadows on the tent walls as they passed. Everyone they saw nodded respectfully in deference to their position as dining guests of the sheikh. Inside the octagonal tent, the air was scented with cinnamon. Flickering candles lit a low wooden table set with dishes of roasted lamb, rice, kofta, freshly baked bread, and bowls of thick red and green broth. The sheikh's piercing eyes glinted in the dim candlelight. He gestured to Strickland, patting the pillow beside him. Habib sat on Strickland's other side to translate, and Franklin and Nurse Saleh sat across from the 3 men. Habib introduced everyone. "Abdul Bar," said the sheikh, bowing slightly to each of them with his hands on his heart. They replied in kind. "Bob," Strickland said. "Bub," the elder repeated back with relish. Despite the language barrier, Abdul-Bar proved to be a charming dinner companion, regaling them with tales of his adventures and conquests in the desert as a young man. "I learned very early that the desert has a soul, a power," he said, his eyes glinting in the golden light. "The wise man merges with that power and learns the ways of its strength. The fool does not and is destroyed." Strickland found himself occasionally averting his eyes from the old chieftain as they conversed. His gaze was almost too soul-searching. It was clear why the man had risen to his position of leadership, for he possessed a palpable energy and charisma. Across the table, Franklin and Saleh conversed at length about the role of the World Health Organization and their mutual interests in disease prevention in the developing world. Strickland found himself momentarily pulled in by the discussion. Then the sheikh spoke directly to him, pausing to let Habib translate. "I can often see into men's eyes," he said without a hint of egotism. "I sense that the desert also speaks to you, and that this journey is about more than just your science." Strickland looked back at him without speaking, and the old man placed his hand on his wrist. At once, Strickland felt a palpable warmth enter his body. As he looked into the old man's eyes in the flickering candlelight, he felt suddenly disoriented, though not unpleasantly so, as if time and place had been cut loose from their moorings. "You will find what you seek," the old man announced, "but not here, not yet."
When he was 13, while playing in the backyard, Strickland experienced a simple but earth-shaking epiphany. His father had recently bought him a beginner's guide to stargazing, and he had been reading about the planets and constellations. Numerous fires were raging in the wooded foothills near their home that summer after several seasons of drought. Strickland stood with his arms outstretched as tiny flakes of ash drifted down like snow from the orange-brown sky. It felt like the end of the world. He stared directly up at the midday sun, which had been reduced to a glowing red ball, and suddenly he knew in his gut that it was a star, like any other, but simply closer. Before that moment, he had, of course, known it on an intellectual level, but now he felt it at his core. And the feeling persisted long after that summer's fires had died out. Afterward, it was like a reassuring secret. In the middle of the day, with the sun overhead, Strickland felt bathed in warming starlight. His stargazing book also detailed the history of celestial theory. In the pre-Copernican world, when it was still believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, theories abounded as to the mechanics of celestial orbits. Some proposed elaborate concentric crystal spheres containing the stars. But to explain the movements of observable objects in the heavens, such theories grew ever more unwieldy. A small number of celestial bodies, what were later shown to be planets, seemed inexplicably to reverse direction at regular intervals. As a result, layer upon layer of celestial spheres were added to the theory, like an ever-growing cosmic onion. Finally, Nicholas Copernicus, an astronomer and Catholic cleric, proposed that the prevailing view of the heavens was incorrect. If the Earth was simply shifted from its position as the center of the heavens to become just another of many planets orbiting the sun, all the observable phenomena of the night sky suddenly fell into perfect order. And the theory of celestial spheres came crashing down. But this profound shift of thought took hundreds of years to become universally accepted and threatened the very lives of many of its proponents. The reality of our celestial existence, the Earth turning on its own axis while simultaneously orbiting the sun, required a leap beyond conventional logic. In the backyard that summer, with ashes drifting down around him, young Robert Strickland considered the notion that everything might not be as it seemed. There was little reason to believe that today's understanding of the universe was any more final than the theory of celestial spheres had been. What if our current scientific theories were also incomplete? perhaps in profound ways? What if there were forces and principles beyond current understanding or testing? And what if both viewpoints, what science told you and your deepest intuition, were correct in their own way? Maybe, at least in some instances, each was simply a different way of looking at the same basic truth.
So this final section details the rise of the Noetic group that I mentioned earlier. The protests continued. Meanwhile, for nearly a week, both the NIH and the Vatican were the scenes of in-house battles over how to proceed. Finally, they each issued press releases reiterating that the Vatican was now in full possession of all materials related to the Shroud of Turin, intimating that any cause for controversy was now past. But both camps left the question of actual genetic analysis or manipulation glaringly unaddressed. Sarah Bender watched the evening news over dinner as they profiled an odd new group calling itself Noetic. The Noetics had mobilized a candlelight vigil numbering in the thousands. The group's followers wore hooded iridescent robes of a holographic mylar material, giving them a monk-like aura, but with a futuristic patina. Gathered in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, they held bioluminescent candlesticks, chanting in Gregorian tones. The light from their wands rose into the night, casting the assembled faces in an unearthly glow. Rather than protesting what had allegedly occurred at the NIH, the Noetic saw recent events as welcome harbingers of a new era. They disagreed, a spokesperson said, not with the basic precepts and beliefs of the world's religions, but with the modern-day implementation of those belief systems. While there seemed to be no central hierarchy or organization of leadership in Noetic, they did provide a brief charter statement. In a nutshell, the group painted most traditional religious institutions as having strayed far from the basic teachings of their spiritual founders. Noetic, by contrast, favored the open source paradigm of the software world. In their statement, they advocated a, quote, non-acquisitive, inclusive, and decentralized spirituality without rigid authoritarian hierarchies or controlling and moralistic dogma. As the TV camera panned across the assembled throng, Bender saw a montage of signs held aloft. One depicted a homeless person who looked like conventional images of Jesus, being ordered away from the steps of a megachurch by a coiffed and tailored televangelist. Another pictured a priest, a rabbi, and an imam feasting together in the back of a convertible super-stretch limo. But the best one, she thought, read, Noetic, the human race version 2.0, and Noetic equals transcendence plus compassion. What more do we need? The assemblage seemed to be a loose confederation of cyber 20-somethings and New Age enthusiasts. The obvious intent of the network television coverage was to present the group as a band of kooks. But Sarah saw it differently. Having flirted with the speed metal and trance music scenes during her teens, she often found herself in sympathy with the primal energy of such movements. Thank goodness for the young and the young at heart, she thought. Without a youthful sense of righteous indignation, coupled with a healthy dose of naivete, who would ever lead the charge for any real change? The news story finally ended, and she gazed out the window at the winter landscape below. A dead leaf fell from a tree and landed on the windowsill outside her living room. Desiccated and brown, it was soon dusted in a delicate layer of new snow. She sat watching as more snow slowly enveloped the leaf in a soft white cocoon. Thanks for coming, everybody.